Good evening. I'm Lee McDonald, Director of Counseling, Health, and Wellness for the district. I'd like to welcome you to our first ever International Student Missions and Financial Aid Tips Night. We are excited to be running this event in partnership with Rutgers University. I cannot think of a better university to partner with, not only just because I went to Rutgers University, but more importantly, we have a lot in common with Rutgers, being that we are a larger school district and have quite a number of families from all over the world, which I think is great. And we are constantly celebrating our diversity in WWP, and I know that Rutgers University is doing the same. So with that being said, just a couple housekeeping items. We are recording this, and we'll make sure that this is available along with the PowerPoint on the district website under counseling, high school counseling, college planning guides. I'll also make sure that I tweet out the presentation at WWP Counseling, should you want to reference any of the materials presented here this evening. And as we go, feel free to add questions into the chat feature. That way, at the end, we will take questions. Kindly keep those questions to general questions. If you have specific questions regarding your son or daughter, by all means, I know that our presenters will be more than happy to follow up with you at a later date. So really appreciate our presenters. I'm actually going to turn it over to Ms. Kavita James, who is one of our school counselors at High School North. And I give her all the credit in terms of pushing for this evening and really putting it together. Again, we're excited to finally have this come to fruition. We, of course, wish we were able to do this in person, but hopefully next year we'll be able to do that. So Ms. James, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can talk about the why behind this event and introduce our two speakers this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. McDonald. Hey, everyone. I am so glad all of you were able to join us for this session tonight. My name is Kavita James, and I am one of the counselors at High School North, just as Dr. McDonald mentioned. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to share with you why we in the guidance department felt the need to have this informational session, maybe for the first time. Over the past years, we have had students in both the high schools who were non-immigrant, who were on non-immigrant visas, and who applied to colleges as international students, asking us many questions relating to this topic. And I'm just going to tell you some of the more popular ones that have come our way in the past. So students often want to know about, are there opportunities to receive financial aid? Financial aid is usually a big piece. Are there grants or scholarships available? Can international students work on campus? Can they work off campus? And are there any extra steps, additional steps that they need to take in the college application process or when filling out the SRAR? I know a couple of my students have asked me, what does the conversion from an H visa to an F1 student visa look like? So these are just, some of the questions that we get from our students over the years. So to answer these questions and more, we felt it is best to get the experts in. And now that brings us to our two speakers for tonight. So we have Sarah Blackburn. She's the Assistant Director of International Recruitment and Outreach, Rutgers University. And I know Sarah would be traveling the world at this time of the year recruiting for Rutgers, if not for the COVID situation we are in right now. She has been a great resource for us, and I have to tell you that, and has been a tremendous help in setting up this session. So really happy to have her speaking tonight. And we also have Marlena Bain, who is the admissions coordinator for Rutgers University. Marlena is assigned to handle inquiries and assist students from our area, from the Mercer County area. And a quick fun fact about Marlena is before graduating from Rutgers in 2017, the high school she attended is WWP High School South. Yay. Um, and this is what I have always felt, and I'm sure any of you working in the field of education have probably felt too. When our students graduate from our schools and you bump into them later on in life as professionals in their respective careers, it is a wonderful feeling. It is truly satisfying. Marlene, I must say that. So a big thank you to both of you, our speakers. Um, and I am going to now hand it over to Sarah and Marlena.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us today. I'll start by just sharing with you a quick agenda of what it is that we'll go over in this presentation. I'll invite Marlena to introduce herself to you again. We'll talk a little bit about some Rutgers-specific information, give you a sense of who we are if you're unfamiliar with the university in your backyard. We'll talk a little bit about who you are and what your immigration status may be. Talk a bit about what the international student application process is like, as well as supporting documentation that may be asked of you as an international student. Talk a bit about money, financial aid and scholarships, and then of course we will open up for questions at the end. So please feel free to add those questions to the Q&A as we go along. Marlena, I will ask you to introduce yourself and take it away from there.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marlena, and as Ms. James and Sarah said, I am the Mercer County representative for Rutgers University, New Brunswick. So this is my email. Oh, wait, it's at the end, and I'll also be putting it in the chat for you to use as a resource. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about Rutgers specific admissions procedures, but also any advice or counsel we can give on the application process in general.
Awesome, thank you.
So jumping right in, as Sarah mentioned, we do want to give you just a quick overview of who we are and what we do at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Rutgers University, New Brunswick is the flagship state university of New Jersey. I know a lot of people think of Rutgers as just the backyard school because we know where it is and we've heard about it our whole lives for the most part, but we are so much more than that. We are a big school. We have 36,000 undergraduate students. We don't try to hide the fact that we're a big school, but in my opinion, a big school just means big opportunities. Our students are studying in over 100 majors in 11 different schools across the university, and we are a world-renowned research institution, which I will get into in the next couple of slides. We are also a part of the Big Ten Athletic Conference, so for any sports fans out there, you know how special and exciting this is for student life and our reputation. We have 24 D1 sports, but what a lot of people don't know is that being a part of this athletic conference also allows us to have an academic alliance with all other Big Ten institutions. So what that really means is if there's ever a particular course or even a study abroad program that you might not be able to take at Rutgers, you can arrange to take it through another Big Ten school. So we are all about maximizing the amount of opportunities you have at your fingertips without ever leaving your home base. Our students are involved in over 750 plus student organization and clubs. So I did say that we are a big school, but we continually make the effort to try and funnel it down for you on a micro level so that you can find your community and your home and your niche. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. Thank you. So it is our hope that we will be able to have you all on campus soon. We're very sorry that we don't have the honor of meeting you all in person, but of course we're grateful to have this platform where we can connect and share some information that will hopefully help you in the application process. We have created a brand new website for you to tour Rutgers virtually. ExploreRutgers.com is listed at the bottom of this slide. And this is a great tool for you to navigate campus on your own and really get a sense of the type of environment that we have. There's tour guides that pop up throughout the website, giving you more information about academics and programming offerings. So if you are interested in learning more about Rutgers and what our campus layout is like, please use this website as a resource. We've designed this map for you to just see what our layout is like. We are a big school, but we've purposely designed it to have 5 different neighborhood campuses for you to really thrive in. Again, we're all about funneling our school down on a micro level so that you can find a community. Each layout, each neighborhood has their own environment and feel to it. But Rutgers, New Brunswick is in the middle. It's in the heart of New Jersey in a very vibrant and dynamic city. We do have a train station right on campus. NJ Transit runs right through it. So you can be in New York City Penn Station in about 45 minutes and Philadelphia in about 90 minutes. So this is a great thing for students to take advantage of, not just for going into the city on a weekend to do something fun with friends, but you're now doubling and tripling the amount of opportunities you have for research and internship experiences. I know that some of you can barely grasp the concept of going away to college for 4 or maybe 4+ years, let alone getting a job and entering the workforce. But here at Rutgers, we really want you to start dreaming now. We want you to dream big and dream about what your internship could be like or what you want your job to look like, and we will help you get there. So that city access and the fact that we're situated so perfectly in between 2 major metropolitan areas is a great resource for our students. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. So at Rutgers, we really do have a hands-on learning approach. We don't want you just sitting in a lecture hall passively learning. We want you outside engaging with members of your intended career fields and working alongside your professors to actively learn. I did mention that Rutgers is a world-renowned research institution, and we really are. We have 175 research facilities on campus that students are able to get involved in as early as their first year. This is not an opportunity that's reserved for upperclassmen students. It's something that we want all students to get involved in. One of the most recent and notable examples of research that has gone on at Rutgers is that researchers created the first saliva-based COVID-19 test. And we are so proud of our researchers who worked on that project and their Herculean efforts. Some other examples of research that's happened at Rutgers is our food sciences engineers created the Doritos Locos Taco for Taco Bell and patented the McDonald's French fry recipe, which I think is pretty cool. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's real research that's happening at Rutgers. When we say Rutgers is a research institution, we don't just mean that it's students sitting in a library looking up sources for their research papers. It's real students working in laboratories with professionals for research that's going to ultimately affect and change the world. It's an individualized experience with 180 study abroad programs at your fingertips. And we do have school-based honors programs and the Honors College. When we get into our deadlines and some more specifics about the application later in this presentation, we will touch on that again. With that research and internship experience, it also means that you are going to be successful at Rutgers. We have 650 employers who visit campus every single year, and these employers return to campus every year because they really know the caliber of our students. They know that our students are successful and are taking on much more earlier in their college career. For example, getting involved in research as early as their first year. That was a really quick overview of Rutgers University New Brunswick. This presentation is geared more towards a general application process, but we do hope that you continue reading through our literature online and taking advantage of websites like ExploreRutgers.com to learn more about Rutgers. And if you do think it would be a good fit, we hope that you apply. So I will turn it back over to Sarah now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlena. You're about to get a ton of emails and questions from interested students. That was a great overview. Thank you. So we'll transition now and talk a little bit more about what it means to be an international student in the US. What is your status and what does that mean when it comes to submitting your application to a university? So on the slide here, you see 4 different, actually 5 really, I snuck 2 in one there, different types of status students can have as students in the United States. So we'll dive into each of these different sections into a little bit more detail. So DACA students, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, our dreamers. These are students who maybe have come to this country as children, but have been living here for a significant period of time, maybe out of a visa status or without a status at all. Students who qualify for DACA can apply for need-based financial aid in New Jersey. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there are some states that don't allow for that, but New Jersey is one of the handful that do. So we're really grateful for that, and it gives students a little bit more opportunity when it comes to looking at different schools within their area. Students who qualify for DACA status can also appeal for in-state tuition at Rutgers and at other state universities in New Jersey, should they allow for you to do that. Typically, in order to do this, there's some documentation that you would need to provide, including showing proof that you've graduated from a New Jersey high school. Part of what we require in order to declare residency within the state of New Jersey would be a minimum of at least 1 year of living within the state. For students who are coming out of high school, they are looking to see that you've graduated from a New Jersey high school. DACA students would also be considered for merit-based scholarships that we at Rutgers would offer to domestic students. Now, this is one of those things where this is specific to Rutgers University, and there will be some times that I'll discuss that throughout the presentation, and I'll do my best to try to clarify. This is an everybody policy versus this is a Rutgers policy, because that's one of the unique things here. Each school treats students different depending on their status. Now, switching gears now to look at the B tourist visas or undocumented students. So undocumented students cannot necessarily apply for need-based aid in New Jersey, particularly if you hold an expired B tourist visa. But if you're truly undocumented, but you have not applied for or do not qualify for some reason for DACA, there might still be some options for you. As an undocumented student, you can appeal for in-state tuition at Rutgers. If you're graduating from a New Jersey high school, that policy does apply to some of our other state universities within New Jersey, but not if you hold a valid B visa, as that's a tourist visa. B visa holders can be considered for international student scholarships at Rutgers, while no visa holders or undocumented students would be able to be considered for our domestic student scholarships if you're attending a New Jersey high school. Non-immigrant visas. This tends to be some of the more popular popular statuses for students who are applying to Rutgers. A non-immigrant visa could be somebody who holds an F visa, a J, an H, a G, a TN, a B. Any of those would fall into this category, and there are many more for students that would be considered non-immigrant visa holders. If you are a non-immigrant visa holder, you cannot apply for any need-based aid in New Jersey. That is something that's reserved only for citizens and residents. Excuse me, we're about to have a cat come across my screen. Thank you very much. But there are certain visa statuses where you can apply for in-state tuition, or at least be considered for in-state tuition, provided you are graduating again from a high school within the state of New Jersey. At Rutgers, students who would qualify for that in-state tuition exemption, or who could apply for that, would be students who are dependent on someone holding an A, G, H, or E visa. This is a new policy. There was a major change made to this last year, which now includes H visa holders. So we can certainly talk about this in the Q&A or after via email, but we'd be happy to walk you through the process of what it means to apply for in-state tuition at Rutgers. Students who hold a non-immigrant visa will be considered for international student scholarships, if that is your visa status. Finally, we'll take a look at legal permanent residence. So this is somebody who either already has a green card or has applied and their green card status is pending. Students who are considered to be legal permanent residents of the US are able to complete the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This means that you can be considered both for need-based aid within the state of New Jersey, as well as need-based aid throughout the country. So you can certainly go ahead and submit that and be considered. Students who are considered legal permanent residents that have been living within the state of New Jersey for at least 1 year can also be considered for in-state tuition at Rutgers and other state universities as well. And finally, students who are considered to be legal permanent residents would also be considered for those domestic student scholarships. So that's a little bit more about what your visa status might mean in general. Now, finding a college fit should have nothing to do with that. While those are certainly things that you want to be considering and holding in the back of your mind so that you're prepared and you have all the documentation that you'll need and all of the things that are important to you when it comes to choosing a university, leave that aside when you're thinking about where you want to apply. We'll dispel some myths and misconceptions about what scholarships and public and private institutions mean a little bit later when we get to the financial information. But I think the best piece of advice that I can give to a student who is looking to build their college list is to focus on the things that matter to you. I think one of the best examples that I can give here is there's a study that was done a couple of years ago about which university had the best medical program. And so they asked a bunch of regular people, NBC News did this study, who has the best medical program in the United States? And everybody said a school you may or may not have heard of, Princeton. They actually don't have a med school. So people were just assuming that that was going to be the best option without necessarily knowing what majors were available. I always think that's a great place to start. If you're unsure of what colleges you should be considering, think about what you want to study. Not all schools have all majors, so it's important to get a better understanding of what opportunities are available there. In terms of location, you definitely want to be thinking about what type of environment you want to be in. Are you thinking that you really want to be in a city? Is that important to you? Then be looking at those urban locations. Are you not so sure whether or not that would be the best fit for you? I encourage you to think about some more suburban or rural universities, places where it would be a little bit quieter than it might be if you were in a downtown metro area. And do you even want to be in the US at all? You don't have to be. There are great universities all over the world. So bear that in mind and hold those things in tandem when you're thinking about what your college list should look like. Another thing that can be helpful is thinking about size or type. I'm going to full disclosure, while I love my university and I'm so grateful to work at Rutgers, I went to a much smaller school because that was what was the best fit for me. So that's something you can keep in mind too. And finally, what else do they have? Is there a specific sport or club or organization that you're really interested in being involved in? If so, make sure that university offers that, because what you're doing inside the classroom is just as important as what you're doing outside the classroom. When it comes to building your list and then beginning to ask universities questions about what you need to know in order to apply or whether or not you should choose that university, as an international student or a non-resident of the US, who helps you might be different from institution to institution. So you might be looking to ask questions to folks in the undergraduate admission office. The university might have a separate office entirely for international admissions housed in a different department that's not admissions. You might be working specifically with the diversity or minority office at that university. So it varies greatly. At Rutgers specifically, we do have a branch within our undergraduate admissions office that works with international students. And as you can tell from the fact that I'm presenting here today with a colleague, we all work very closely with one another to make sure that students are getting the information that they need in order to be successful in their application process and to better understand if Rutgers is a good fit for them to attend. So where your support office is may be based on your immigration status. It might also be based on your academic background. You might, because you're going to school in the United States, be considered a domestic student, and that's cool too. So just be sure to be mindful of these questions and get to know the admissions folks or the application reviewers wherever it is that you're planning to apply. I'll take this moment just to say, if you are talking with someone that works as an institution of higher education, I'm going to let you in on a secret. They pay us to help you. So please don't be afraid to ask questions, to send us emails, to give us a phone call, to visit campus if you're able to do that at a university. We are all here to help. Anybody who works in higher ed is doing it for the joy of helping students to navigate their college career, because we feel that that's a really important and pivotal time, and the college search process is no different. All right, so moving forward, we'll talk a little bit about what your admissions requirements might look like, as well as what extra information a university may ask you for if you're considering applying to their institution. So in terms of admissions requirements, it almost exactly mirrors what we would be asking a domestic student for or a US citizen for. We're looking for students to submit an application. We're looking for students to submit whatever supporting documentation is required. So that could mean, of course, your transcripts or a self-reported academic record. It could mean test scores, although that might be a little bit different this year than it has been in years prior. The only other thing that might be extra for an international student when it comes to the admissions requirements or process would be to provide an English language proficiency test. But I would say 9 times out of 10, provided that you are graduating from a high school within the US, that requirement would likely be waived for you. If you're not having an easy time finding that information on an institutional website about whether or not that would be a requirement, definitely ask, because it might just mean that they need to waive it for you. I often find that some institutions would actually waive SAT or ACT for international students in a normal year, so before the pandemic. At least for Rutgers, we would still require it, but this year, for 2021, any students who are applying do not have to submit the SAT or ACT, as we know that there are definitely some difficulties with securing test scores right now. Another thing to note is that sometimes the more competitive programs, like an engineering program, a business program, may require the SAT score, even though they didn't require that for international students in the general process. And they often have very strict requirements. That's going to be the same for everybody, regardless of what your passport looks like. So bear that in mind. We are trying to hold all students accountable, regardless of who you are or where you come from, when we're looking at the application and what you've submitted. We want students to be successful. And so we're asking for these things and have these requirements for that reason. We want you to get to the university that you've enrolled in and thrive there. So as an international student, if you are planning to study on an F1 visa, and we'll talk again about that in a little bit more detail in a moment, you may be asked to submit some additional documentation. This is so that the school that you're interested in can issue you a Form I-20. The Form I-20 is what you will need to take in order to the consulate or embassy in order to apply for your F1 student visa. So the I-20 is supporting documentation issued to you by the school so that you can get the visa to study in the US. In order to get an F1 visa, typically universities are asking for students to provide the following. First being an affidavit of support. So it's unlikely as a 17-year-old, at least this was the case for me as a 17-year-old, that you have enough money in your bank account to support your own education, and that's okay. We expect that an international student studying on an F1 visa is getting financial support from somebody else, whether it's a parent or an extended family member, it doesn't matter, but you do need to have them sign an affidavit in order to indicate that they are there to assist you financially with your studies. We're also looking for bank statement. So you have to show that you can in fact pay for whatever the year of fees would be at the university. So each institution will have a different funding amount that they're looking for students to show in that bank statement. You'll notice here that it says bank statements, plural. It can be many. We see that all the time, that students will need to ask for support from multiple family members in order to show the full amount of what the fees would be for the year. Something else I'd like to mention when we're talking about the bank statements is oftentimes for students who are applying for an F1, you may have a family member that lives nearby to the university, or you might already have housing secured yourself because you're living with family or what have you. One of the kind of caveats about this is even if you're planning on living off campus, you are still required to show the full amount of your cost of study. And in most cases, that would also include whatever it costs in order to live on campus. So bear that in mind and certainly be asking questions if you're planning to live at home, because that might be an important caveat for you. Some schools will waive that requirement with some other documentation. Rutgers does not, but other schools do, so definitely ask. Often you will be asked to provide proof of income as well. So while the bank statements are showing only one academic year of your fees, they are also looking for you to show proof that income will continue to come so that you can pay for your second, third, fourth, and maybe even a fifth, if something goes crazy, year of your studies at the university. If you are studying in the US on an F1 visa already, you would also be asked to provide a transfer form. So this would show your information from SEVIS, which is the organization associated with Homeland Security that would keep track of any international students in the US. If you're going to be taking your SEVIS record and then transferring that to another university or from your high school to a university, we'll need to just have that information on file so that we can transfer your record at the appropriate time. Once you send all of these to the university and we go through them and make sure that everything is valid and check all the boxes, then the university will issue you a Form I-20. Now, some universities will actually ask you to submit all of these supporting documentation at the time of application. Typically, if they're doing that, they will also still issue you an I-20 as soon as you've been admitted to the university. Other schools, and Rutgers falls in this second category, might say, I'm not going to issue you an I-20 document or anything that you would need in order to attend a visa appointment until you confirm your enrollment. That's just how different schools work. So at least at Rutgers, you would need to say, yes, I'm absolutely coming. And then at that point, we would issue you an I-20. So with that in mind, since some schools might be asking for this information at the time of application, it's good for you to keep in mind that it's okay to have more than one I-20. That's fine. But here's what you need to do if you do have more than one I-20. You should first, once you decide which school you're going to be enrolling in, let all of the other universities know that you will not be attending. This gives them an opportunity to cancel your I-20 and clear out their records. They'll need to do that either way, whether you tell them or not. So it's kind and polite for you to do that. It's helpful for everybody. And then whatever school you're enrolling in, that should be the only I-20 that you take with you to your visa appointment. Only bring that one. So on that side, there was a mention about change of status. So I know that Kavita mentioned that this is a common question, particularly for students studying on an H visa right now. So we'll go over a little bit of what the differences are between those two visas and why you may want to switch or why you may not, depending on your circumstances. So students who are dependent on someone who holds an H visa can study in the United States for high school, for university, with no restriction at all. So that means you could take one class, you could take part-time student status, or you can be studying full-time. It doesn't matter. Any combination of those things, you can be part-time your first semester and full-time the next semester, doesn't matter. Students who are studying on an H visa can also have the ability to study online. Now, this year is a weird year where F1 students have been able to maintain status while studying online, but I anticipate that once the pandemic has settled, that they will go back to putting restrictions on F1 students who are studying online. So if you're looking to study online fully for your full program and you hold an H visa, that might be better for you. Students who hold an H visa or dependent on an H visa holder cannot work on campus or off campus. So you would not be able to get a job if you were holding an H visa as you were studying. Students who are on an H visa are also not eligible for CPT or OPT. CPT stands for Curricular Practical Training, and OPT stands for Optional Practical Training. Many of you are probably familiar with these two phrases already, but just in case you're not, I'll go over them briefly. CPT is something that students can apply for while they are in their course of study. You can also apply for CPT just after you graduate, but only for the 6 months after you graduate from university. Students who are applying for CPT are typically doing so because they're participating in a co-op program. So they're going to be working off campus for pay and need to have permission to do that. And they can also do it for internships as long as you're earning credit for that internship. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not. It really depends on whether or not you are being paid. If you're being paid, then you absolutely need to be applying for CPT. OPT is for students who have already graduated. So optional practical training gives you the opportunity to work for up to 1 year, and students who are in STEM fields can apply for an extension for an additional 16 months if they so choose to do so. But if you hold an H visa, you are not eligible to do either of those things. Finally, it's important to note that if you are dependent on an H-4 visa holder, your dependent visa expires at the time that you turn 21. If that's the case for you, then you are going to have to switch to your F1 visa for your final year if you're going to be turning 21 throughout that year either way. So it's important to be mindful of when your birthday is and so that you know when it's time to apply for your F1 visa or maybe apply for a change of status should you wish to do that. Students who are studying on an F1 visa in the US are here to do just that and only that. If you are on an F1 visa, your purpose in the United States is to study, and that's it. You have to study full-time every semester that you were enrolled, with some caveats. Occasionally, if you are in your final semester and you only have a few credits left to take, they might be able to make an exception for you, but only if you only have a few credits left to complete. So generally, if you're on an F1 visa, you have to be studying full-time all the time. You also have to be studying in person all the time. Again, with the exception that they've made some loosening of that restriction this year, just given the circumstances. Students who are studying on an F1 visa are eligible for on-campus employment. So if you want to get a job on campus, you can. And I think it's important to keep in the back of your mind. I think it was often thought that if you have an on-campus job, that means you're serving food in the dining hall or cleaning the dorms or something like that, working in the library. And certainly those things could be true if you have an interest in doing that. However, on-campus employment means so much more than that. You can be working in one of the academic departments, helping to assist with research. You can be working in the admissions office, giving tours. That's a subtle plug. So there are lots of things that you can do in order to get experience on campus and get paid for it. Students who are studying on an F1 visa are eligible for CPT and OPT. So if you're interested in working after you graduate, then you certainly want to be switching to that F1 visa so that you can take advantage of the opportunity to work using OPT. And finally, as an F1 student, you need to maintain your status throughout the whole time that you're here. That's important because if you're thinking about potentially studying for a master's program in the US or something like that, should your status lapse or something happens, you might not be able to get a visa again in the future. So it's really important. And one of the things that is certainly important to remember as a university student is that the onus is on you. If your visa is about to expire, it's not your advisor's job to tell you that. You need to be sure that you're maintaining your status, you know what your eligibility is, and that you're following the guidelines that have been set out for you. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can apply for an F1 student visa, should you wish to do so. First, you need the I-20. Once you have that in your hand, there are two ways that you can gain student status. You can either return to your home country and apply for your F1 visa at a US consulate embassy outside of the United States. Now, a couple of things about this. You can go somewhere else. You do not necessarily have to go to your home country. However, sometimes, depending on how strict the immigration officer happens to be, they may tell you no because you didn't go back to the country that your passport was issued from. So the best practice would be to go back to wherever it is where you hold a passport in order to apply for this. Typically, I encourage students to take this route. The reason that I encourage students to take this route is that it's fast. While obviously it is not inexpensive for you to return home or to get a hotel in order to do this and attend this visa appointment and all the things that would need to go with that, it's faster. You know right away whether or not you've received it, and you're going to get that in the mail in a week or two. So it is certainly the faster option, and it can actually sometimes be less expensive to fly home than to take the second route. The second route would be to apply for a change of status while you remain in the US. So if you submit a request to do this, that's called an I-539. So once you have that in your hand, then you have to wait and wait and wait some more in order to get called to go to have an appointment to discuss this further. Oftentimes students who are doing the change of status in the United States are doing so for a particular reason. It's a student who was on a dependent H visa who now needs to turn 21 or has turned 21 and now needs to switch to the F1 visa. It could be for someone who's trying to switch from a J1 to an F1. It could be a student who was in the United States just to travel around and decided, hey, that school looks pretty good. I want to switch my status so that I can stay and I can go to that school. So there are a myriad of reasons why you might choose to apply for a change of status in the US. Now, as I mentioned, it can be expensive. Typically, you're encouraged to hire an immigration lawyer in order to do this, and it can be a time-consuming process. Depending on your visa status, you may not be able to take classes while you're applying for that change of status. That wouldn't apply to an H visa holder, but it would apply to someone who holds a B visa. For example. So it's important to just be mindful of your own situation and choose the path that makes the most sense for you. I can speak from experience when I say that if you're not sure what the best path would be in that circumstance, ask your International Student Support Services office at whatever school you're looking to enroll in. They can likely put you in touch with the right people to answer the right questions in order to make sure that you're picking whatever is the best path for you. And that's a little bit about changing your status. So we'll switch into the last section here about money. How in the world am I going to pay for this education? So looking at tuition and fees based on your immigration status. We'll look at some private schools and also public schools and kind of how those two institutions may differ when it comes to their tuition and fees. So at a private school, all fees are the same, no matter who you are, where you come from, what state you live in, what country you hail from, and they do not use your immigration status or your passport in order to determine what your cost would be. Now, occasionally there are going to be some extra fees for an international student, but that's a conversation for another time. For all intents and purposes today, private schools, fees are the same for everybody. On the other side of the literal fence here, you have public schools. At a public institution, the fees are going to be determined based on residency or immigration status. This is in part because a public school is funded by the public, by the state that you're living in. So there are different categories for students based on that. Now, taking a deeper dive into the public school thing, in-state tuition rates are reduced fees charged to the residents of the people that live in that state. So at Rutgers, we would consider any US passport holder to be an in-state resident who would receive in-state tuition. We would also allow a student who is considered to be DACA or undocumented, as well as the handful of visas that I mentioned previously and also appear on this slide, can appeal for in-state tuition at Rutgers University and some of the other in-state tuitions in the state of New Jersey. On the other side of the fence here, out-of-state fees. So this is going to be the fees that are charged to any non-resident. Now, at most universities, and Rutgers definitely falls into this category, there's no difference in the tuition for an international student and a student that lives in the state of New York. You're going to be paying the same thing as long as you are from outside of New Jersey. You're all equal. At Rutgers, other visa holders would be subject to these out-of-state fees. So that's our L visa holders, I'm sorry, and pretty much anybody who isn't the A, E, or G, H visa. Now, one of the other things, and I'm just going to go back to this other slide here, I want to talk a little bit about the differences in tuition at public and private schools. There's definitely, I think, a misconception that if a university is very expensive, public or private, that you're definitely going to have to pay that. And I really don't think that most of the time that is the case. Private schools do tend to give out a lot of scholarship. Public schools do too. So there are definitely going to be opportunities for you to maybe receive some merit-based aid, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail now. So back to this funding issue. What do I qualify for? What do I not qualify for? Non-immigrant and undocumented DACA students do not qualify for federal funding within the country, but you may qualify for funding from the state that you're attending school in. Public institutions that offer in-state tuition pricing for DACA students are within the states listed here. New Jersey is one of those. There are also quite a few throughout the country. So all of these states would allow students to appeal for in-state tuition and would also allow you to apply for need-based aid in that state. Each state has different residency requirements. So if you're looking at this list and you're like, yes, I wanted to go to Texas A&M, that means that they're going to let me have in-state tuition. That might not be true. Each state will have different criteria for how long you need to live there and who the residency is based on. So do bear that in mind. And again, ask those questions. They're the right questions to be asking when you're reaching out to your admissions counselors. Some states explicitly say, no, you cannot have in-state tuition if you are an undocumented student. Those states are listed there as well. Most states don't offer any financial benefits to an undocumented student, meaning that you might not be able to get in-state scholarships or in-state tuition or whatever. Some exceptions to that would be on this list. And again, New Jersey falls into that category. We're quite proud of the way that we make things work for our undocumented or DACA students. DACA and non-immigrant visa holders should not fill out the FAFSA unless you're asked to. And you may be, if you're applying for residency in order to receive in-state tuition, or if the state wants to consider you for any need-based aid, depending on your status. So just read between the lines, and when you're getting communication, particularly from the school that you intend to enroll in, the one where you'll actually be having to pay the bill, just pay close attention to any emails that they're sending you about financial aid or about scholarships, so that you can be sure that you're doing everything on your end to ensure that you get as much aid as possible. Now, these are some other types of aid that most non-immigrant students will receive or be considered for. The 4 things that you see on this list are absolutely the most common. When an international student says that they're receiving aid, it's likely falling within these categories rather than a need-based aid or something of that nature. So you can apply for academic or merit-based scholarships. And this is another one of those things where it really depends on the school. Rutgers, for example, as long as you apply on time, you would be able to be considered for a merit-based scholarship without having to do anything extra. There are some other schools, though, that would ask you to submit some sort of an application in order to be considered for scholarships. So be mindful of that and just make sure that you're reading all of the things about scholarships if you're looking to be considered for one. Some students will receive some need-based aid. And again, that might depend on what your immigration status is. It may depend on what state you live in. It may depend on what state you're looking to study school. Some students might receive talent or athletic scholarships. So this would be based on some sort of a performing art, or maybe an art portfolio, or you are an exceptional basketball player and you are being recruited to play for a professional or varsity team at a university. And finally, external scholarships. This is one of those kind of sleeper cell type situations. I feel like students see things on fastweb.com or some of these other websites and they're like, oh, I'm not going to take the time to write that 500-word essay and submit that application for that external scholarship. I'm here to tell you that it's worth it. There are scholarships for everything. And oftentimes, as I just said, students just choose not to apply for them. So definitely be mindful and aware that there are opportunities for you to apply for scholarships outside of the university you're planning to attend. I'd also like to note that that might not be just an outside organization. It could be a variety of different places. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. So thinking about what type of aid you can qualify for. Again, scholarships and grants, that's likely going to be coming from the institution that you've been admitted to. But it might even come from your high school. They might be giving you a scholarship based on your performance as you're graduating. I don't know, maybe. You can also be looking at some private organizations that you're familiar with. Boys and Girls Club, religious organizations sometimes will give out scholarships. Or there are also private organizations, like a few that are mentioned here, that give out scholarships to students if they apply for them. So be looking. They're definitely emailing you, and so don't press delete anytime you see the word scholarship on an email. You can apply for a bank loan if you are residing in the US on a valid visa. If you are going to apply for a private bank loan, you do need to have a US citizen as a cosigner. So that is something important to be mindful and aware of if you're planning to apply for a loan. You can pay with your own personal funds and or family funds, or a combination of both. Sometimes there are some governments throughout the world that would sponsor students to study in certain programs. So that's important to think about as well. And if you come from a country that does have government sponsorships, certainly be mindful of that, be applying for that, make sure that they're aware of you and your intent to enroll in a university in the US. And finally, you can work. Now, this is not to be confused with work study, and only F1 students are eligible to do so, as we have already gone over. But I also do want to just add that this is not going to be enough to pay your tuition if you're working on campus. It's definitely for pocket money. It can help you make sure that you can cover the cost of your books or whatever it is that you want to do for fun with your friends this weekend. But student work is meant to be a supplement, not necessarily what would help you to cover the cost of your education. Here are some organizations that I would recommend that you check out if you're interested in learning a little bit more about higher education for students with your visa status. So United We Dream is an organization that helps dreamers out. It provides different scholarship opportunities for our dreamer students. Health Dreamers is an organization for students that are considered DACA and are interested in going into the health professions. Act on a Dream is a really, really cool student-run organization at Harvard. So Act on a Dream is again for dreamers, and it helps to provide a space for those students to talk to each other, to learn a little bit more about what different scholarships are available, etc. So I definitely encourage you to get in touch with those Act on a Dream folks. They're really cool. And finally, there is a great organization run by a non-U.S. citizen who is here in the U.S. on a student visa called Immigrant Rising. And so this is for students that would be going through the immigration process or are applying for a green card. And talking about their experiences, and again, offering different scholarship opportunities for students in that circumstance. So here's the advice that I give to any student who's looking to be successful when it comes to trying to fund your studies in higher ed. First and foremost, have an honest conversation with your parents. I know that's no fun for anybody to have, and it might be kind of uncomfy, but it's important for everybody to be on the same page about what you can and cannot afford. And for you to be mindful of what types of schools can I go to. Maybe it's a discussion that, yeah, I mean, if you want to go to Harvard, we're going to have to do community college for the first 2 years, and that's okay. So just be open, be honest with each other about what you're thinking. Next, you want to think about the plan. Now that you know what you can and cannot do, let's talk about what schools fall into that category and what part of the world you want to be in. Thinking about your education as an investment is important too. It certainly is not pocket change to send a student to the US. I can tell you firsthand, I'll probably be paying student loans for the rest of my life. However, it is an investment in your future and certainly should be thought of as that. You don't just buy a car thinking, well, I'm only going to use this tomorrow. Whatever it is that you're getting in your bachelor's degree and is something that you'll use for the rest of your life. And finally, do not give up on whatever your dreams are. Even if you don't get into your #1 school, you're still going to fall somewhere that's going to make you so happy and so proud once you graduate. I can speak from experience. I applied early decision somewhere that rudely denied me, and I made it. And here I am today doing something that I really love, which is talking to students and kind of to help them to navigate that path. So don't give up on your dreams, whatever they are. You will find a way to chase them and to achieve them no matter what. And so with that, we'll open it up to the Q&A, and thank you so much. Here are our email addresses, just in case you want to take a quick picture of that, and we'll leave it there. We'll also put them in the chat as well. It looks like we've got quite a few questions in here on the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and just start answering them. Give me just a second. If a student doesn't have a social security number, how can you apply for the FAFSA? It really depends on the institution. Oftentimes I find that if a school is asking you to fill out the FAFSA, it's for a reason. You may be eligible to get a social security number. You may be able to apply without the social security number. DACA students are able to submit, so there is a way. In order to do a FAFSA without a social security number, you do have to print it out and fill out that document physically, which is a pain, but if you want to be able to submit the FAFSA, that's what you'll need to do. How is the status identified as a local? Is it mandatory to stay at least 1 year during high school or any time during the year? So I'm going to answer this question about residency status from the perspective of New Jersey only. I can't speak to any other states, so you would certainly want to be talking with the institution, my counterpart at any of those universities in order to get the answer to this question. But as far as New Jersey is concerned, in order to be considered a resident of New Jersey, you need to either be a permanent citizen or non-resident or fall into one of those categories that I just identified with the different visa statuses appropriately. And then from there, you need to be staying and paying taxes within the state of New Jersey for a minimum of 1 year in order to be considered a resident. Now, for students who are DACA, for students that are on the A, G, H, or E visas and are looking to apply for residency at Rutgers, this is actually not based on the amount of time that you've spent in New Jersey. It is based on the fact that you yourself are graduating from a high school within the state of New Jersey. For students that might be looking to a petition, like if you're a US citizen that moved from Connecticut to New Jersey, like me, and you are planning to apply, you would need to be residing in New Jersey, and so would your parents if you are under the age of 26 for a minimum of a year. Let's see. Non-immigrant visa, is it the same as an H4, the L2 visa? So L2 is a different visa status from the H4s. So while I wish the answer to this question was different, H4s only can apply for in-state tuition. L2s unfortunately would not be eligible for that. As an H visa holder coming from outside the state, would you pay in-state tuition or out-of-state tuition? That's a great question. If you are an H visa holder who resides outside of the state of New Jersey, you would pay those out-of-state tuition and fees at Rutgers. If a green card application has been filed, will you qualify for in-state tuition or need base aid? Great question. If the green card application has been filed, no. But once it's approved, then yes, you can be considered for all of those things. Need-based financial aid from both the state and the federal government, as well as the in-state tuition. Green card pending, I mean approved. Let's see. Students who switch from an H visa to an F visa will not be considered for in-state tuition, even though they graduated from a New Jersey high school. That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking this, whoever asked it. So it's a little complicated when it comes to this. If you are, as a high school student, dependent on an H visa holder, but you're planning to switch to an F1, that's fine. You just need to show documentation that you were dependent on an H visa holder while you were completing your high school studies. So students in that circumstance would still be able to apply and receive in-state tuition, and the same thing would apply for a student who decides to do the first 2 to 3 years of their studies on that H visa. When you age out and turn 21, you will still have the ability to maintain those in-state tuition rates at Rutgers, even once you've switched to the F visa, as long as you've already been approved for the in-state tuition rates based on your previous status. Student with an H visa approved, waiting for a green card, they would be considered a legal resident depending on the status. And we would really need to look at your documentation in order to confirm that, but you certainly can apply for in-state tuition rates either way, depending on that status. So you're in good shape. Quite a few questions on here that are very specific to folks' visa statuses. I definitely encourage you to check the chat and send those questions to me personally, because I don't want to be talking about things that are very, very minute. But in front of everybody, but absolutely feel free to email me and I'd be happy to discuss that with you on a case-by-case basis. What options are available to a student dependent on an L visa? You certainly still can apply to Rutgers. You can certainly still be considered for any merit-based awards that we have. But unfortunately, we would only be able to consider someone who's dependent on an L visa holder for the in-state tuition. Do L visa holders get OPT or CPT? No, you can only qualify for OPT or CPT if you are enrolled as an F1 student. So I definitely encourage you to change your status if you're considering OPT or CPT. As an H visa holder, can I enroll in Rutgers and switch my status? Yes, you can, and you would still be able to maintain that in-state tuition should you choose to do that. The net price calculator does not work for H visa students. How do you estimate the total cost? Great question. So the total cost of education is available on our admissions website. Most institutions would operate in the same way. There is a federal mandate that we would all need to make that information available and apparent. But if you're having any trouble kind of distilling all the numbers and adding them up together, certainly reach out to us. For Rutgers, I can say that the total cost of education, what we are looking for families to show on their I-20 documentation, is $52,000. So that includes the tuition at the university as well as the cost of the room and board and the meal plan. So that's the magic number for Rutgers. I can't speak for another school. I see another question here about the FAFSA. Yes, if you're being asked to fill out the FAFSA, you can do that without a social security number, but it does have to be done on a paper form. When you change your status after you turn 1, can you continue to take the classes at the university? Yes. If you are changing from an H4 visa to an F1 after you turn 21, absolutely. You can continue taking classes while you're doing the change of status. That is an exception that gets made for students that are switching from that H4. Let's see. Marlena, if you wouldn't mind, I'm seeing a question about the cost. So if you could post in the chat the link to our tuition, that would be really helpful. I appreciate it. Let's see. Some institutions require the FAFSA. Yep, we talked about that. Can you please explain a little bit more about the selection process for international students in terms of SAT or ACT scores and other requirements like volunteering? Thank you, Marlena. So whoever was asking about the tuition, that's been posted there, so please feel free to review it. As far as the application process, again, I can really only speak for my institution, and with that I can say we are looking for international students to meet our admission profile. So we're not looking for international students to have higher grades or higher test scores. We are looking for them to fall in line with the averages for the rest of the students that are enrolling at the university. In terms of extracurricular requirements, again, same thing. We actually only allow students to put in 5 things when they're putting in their extracurricular involvement on our application, mostly because we want to see quality, not quantity. We don't want you to have 20 things on that list. We want you to tell us about what you're proud of and what you've really been working hard at throughout your time in high school. So in terms of what we're looking for, I mean, we're looking for a well-rounded student. We're looking for students who are challenging themselves academically, and we're certainly looking for an international applicant to meet the same criteria that we would be asking a domestic applicant to meet. That said, when you are looking at our admission profile, particularly the GPA is calculated on a US scale as if you've attended all 4 years of high school within the United States. If that is not the case for you, if you maybe did your first 2 years in another country and you are now transitioning to a US system, that's okay, but the GPA might not make sense to you. So if that resonates with you, if that speaks to you, please do reach out to me and I'd be happy to talk with you a little bit further and in more detail about what the average GPAs or exam scores are for students studying the curricula you were studying previously. We can certainly help explain that. Ooh, good question. What if the student is a US citizen, but the parent is on an L visa? Then everything is going to be based on the student as the student is the citizen. So if you're a US citizen, but your parents are not, you're still eligible to complete the FAFSA. You are still eligible to be considered for any type of need-based aid, regardless. This applies to Rutgers and any other school. So certainly just be mindful that when you're filling out the FAFSA, it should be based on you, although they will be asking for some of your parents' information. Will the material be shared from this presentation? Yes, I understand it's going to be shared with everybody, so enjoy. Students who switched, we talked about this one already. Yep. I see a question coming in the chat. Is the FAFSA application mandatory for all students applying to college? It is not a requirement. The FAFSA is an optional application. You don't need to submit it. However, you cannot be considered for any need-based aid if you do not submit the FAFSA. So I'd certainly encourage you to do that. Is the 1 year of residency applicable to both parents or one parent if you're looking to declare a residency within the state of New Jersey? Great question. It can be one parent. It does not have to be both. Does being international affect my chances of getting into Rutgers and schools outside of New Jersey to the best of your knowledge? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That would be illegal if that was true. So no, you might be reviewed in a different way, maybe by a different team, like somebody like me rather than somebody like Marlena, but you certainly will still be considered for all of the same opportunities when it comes to entrance to the university. And that certainly applies to Rutgers and everywhere else. If the school is not being welcoming to an international student, maybe that's not a school you want to be at. Is it possible to apply for a scholarship or grant for a student who has US citizenship, but parents are not residents of the United States? Yes, absolutely. You can still apply for scholarships. You can still be considered for merit-based scholarships. All of that is true. If you hold a US passport, then you're certainly able to still be considered for the same opportunities as any other US citizen. Should the affidavit for financial support change from H4F1 only be given by a US permanent resident or US citizen only? That's a great question, and I'm sorry for not clarifying during the presentation. If you're submitting an affidavit for financial support, it does not matter what passport the person who is signing the document to say that they support you holds. That doesn't matter, and we won't ask that information. Simply, we are looking for the name on the bank statement to match the name that's on the supporting affidavit with the signature. That is the only information we would look for from the person who is considered to be the financial support. So no worries there. Is screen students born here? Yep. You guys all have a lot of very similar questions, which is great. It makes my life easy. Does an E2 visa dependent living in New Jersey apply for in-state tuition? Yes, but I do want to say, and I want to be quite clear about this, regardless of which status you hold, whether it's the A, the G, the E, the H, you do have to petition for this. This is not something that will automatically be granted. You do have to fill out our affidavits and our residency requirements in order to receive those in-state tuition rates. Cats are getting anxious. How do students earn money on campus in the current pandemic situation? Great question. I have 4 student workers that work on my team. 2 of them are international students, 2 of them are not. One of them actually is living in China right now, and she is still getting paid to work for us. We just, thank you very much. We have her working remotely. So she answers emails. They talk with students whenever they have questions. So there are certainly ways that we're finding ways to allow students to continue to work on campus. Okay. Can extended family members sponsor 100% for an international student? Yes, absolutely. Anybody can be considered your financial support. It doesn't even have to be a family member. It could just be a family friend. As long as you have their signature on that form, that's the most important thing. See some more questions here again about green card pending. You will not be able to be considered for the in-state tuition until you have received the green card, but you can begin the process of applying for the affidavits. So if you're pending, you can begin the process, but it won't actually come into effect until afterwards. I think that handled most of the questions, but I again would invite you to please email me. I'll go ahead and share my email address once more in the chat so that way you can see it and be in touch with me should you have any questions.
Sarah, Marlena, that was amazing. Can't thank you enough for your presentation, your time, and your just super detailed presentation and answering all the different questions. Again, for the good of the group, we will be posting this presentation on the district website under departments, counseling, high school counseling, college planning guides. Hopefully I can get that up as soon as tomorrow, and also tweet it out at WWP Counseling, and it'll be there for forever. So as long as you need to access that materials, if you have questions, by all means, Sarah and Marlena have been gracious to offer their direct contact information via email. Please reach out to them. Additionally, certainly reach out to your school counselor. If we don't have the answers on something, we'll find out for you. We're here to support you. We understand how difficult times are right now in the college search process and admissions process. Certainly overall, we understand how difficult things are. So if we can support you in any way, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you. Be well, stay safe. And again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Marlena. Thank you, Ms. James, for setting this up. Have a great night, everybody.